Georg, given Switzerland's neutrality, why does it need an army and why does it need mandatory service?
You have to be able to self-defend your territory. That's part of the neutrality, and that's the reason why we have an army. We call it armed neutrality. So that's part of it, and that's also the reason why we have still a conscripted system to have enough people to serve in the army.
But what sort of threats does Switzerland actually face?
Since the Cold War, the threats came down a lot, of course, because there is the confrontation between the two blocs was since 1989 more or less over. Now we have a new situation with Ukraine. It's not a direct threat for Switzerland right now, but the hybrid warfare is, of course, a threat like for all the other European countries right now.
Georg, you are an active conscript yourself in the Swiss Army. Can you tell us a bit about the Swiss Army? How large is it? What proportion are conscripts versus active service?
In Swiss Army, there are serving around 120 to 140,000 men mostly and women. It's still mandatory only for men. The biggest part are conscripted, are people who are doing, we call it milice service. They are doing their civil job, and then for 4 weeks or 3 weeks, they go to the military service. There is an 18 weeks basic training, and then you go every year till you are around 30. You go to the military service every 4 weeks to the repetition. When you're a soldier, when you make a career as an officer, you can stay till 50 years old, like me. I'm a bit gray. I'm a colonel in Swiss Armed Forces when I wear the uniform, and when I don't wear the uniform, I'm a journalist. And that's the idea of our system, to use a bit the collective intelligence of the population.
I understand that Switzerland says it doesn't have an army. It is an army. Can you tell us why the Swiss Army is so well regarded?
It's nowadays a bit a myth. Switzerland was, especially during the Cold War, there were around 800,000 men under arms. We had maybe the biggest fleet of artillery tanks in Europe, more than France. We used the terrain very well. We were very well prepared. There were even discussions to have a Swiss atomic bomb, and because of the conscripted system, we called us Switzerland does not have an army. Switzerland is an army. But after the Cold War, it came down to this 120, 140,000 men. The army is still there, but the myth is stronger in a way than the reality, and it shows that the dissuasion via a good narrative is something very important to defend a country.
I mean, we talked about pure numbers, but could you tell us a little bit about the training? I assume that the training is top rate training of the army.
We can still say that the training, from the technique to the tactics, is still state of the art, maybe better than in other armies. You see that when we have the comparison in some NATO classes, that we are not professionals. We do a professional job, and we see that we can measure ourselves with NATO officers. The basic training is very hard for the soldiers. Everybody has to go to the basic training, even the people who want to be officers. You start 7 o'clock in the morning. You work till 22:00 sharp, and most of the time then after you have good talks with your colleagues. We just decided to buy the F-35 to be state of the art in the Air Force, which is very important. We have still Leopard 2 tanks, which is very demanded right now in Ukraine, but it's not the army like it used to be in the Cold War.
And you talked about the 18 weeks of that training, compulsory training, and then the regular sort of update retraining for the population.
Yes.
That probably means that there's a huge, even though you've reduced the numbers of recent years, that there is a huge majority of the population who are militarily trained.
Exactly, that's true, especially when you're outside of the cities. The soldiers have also their weapon at home. That's also a specialty in Switzerland, not with the ammunition, but the gun, it's at home, and you can keep it also after the military service. And it's interesting that there are more or less no incidents with these weapons.
In Taiwan, we've just extended conscription from just 4 months to a year, it will be. And that was a hard political decision. How does the Swiss population view, conscription and being part of the army? It must have a completely different mindset.
It comes out of the tradition of Switzerland, and it's part also a bit of the identity. But it's there was a big change after 1989, after the Berlin Wall came down. It was before. It was usual that every man served in the army more or less. And nowadays we have a civil service. And a lot of people are not serving in the army, especially the people in the urban circles are not serving in the army. It's more or less, it's mandatory by the constitution, but if you don't want to go to the army, you don't have to go to the army.
I'm also curious about how Switzerland has prepared its territory or protected its territory itself. I understand that there are, hundreds of bunkers across your country.
In the First World War, around the First World War, they started more or less with these fortifications. In the Second World War, even more, because in the Second World War, the backup plan was to go back with the army in the Alps, in a kind of a redouit. It was a term for it. And there were 3 big fortresses in the at the entrances of this Alpine redouit. In the Cold War, when the preparation was enlarged in a way, the idea was also to defend the country from the borders. So everywhere where a potential enemy has to pass a valley or a river or a bridge, there is, for example, a little fortress with prepared artillery positions to have fire to shoot on a possible enemy. After the Cold War, Switzerland reduced these fortifications. Nowadays, they are still there, but they're not in use anymore. We are more or less depending on 3 mechanized brigades, and we have to rethink that. Maybe we were too fast after the Cold War with the reduction of the army, but that's a trend in the whole Western Europe.
Absolutely. And what lessons do you think? What are the key lessons for Taiwan?
I think Taiwan is well protected by the sea, of course, and I think it's important to use the terrain. I think also to use the population, because Taiwan, of course, has a very smart and democratic, educated population, and I think it's important to use the population to defend the country, that everybody can contribute something to the defense of the country, if it's with the arm, as a fighter, or as an officer with the brain. But I think this is also one of the big potentials of Taiwan as a democratic society.